Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here today. Carly, you did an excellent job. I enjoyed getting to listen to that. My day's a little busy, so I can having to kind of come and go as a part of that. But thank you so much. Everything you offered was very wise, and I think it gave all of us a lot to think about. My background's a little different. I'm a licensed psychologist. I'm also a mediator. And obviously I've been doing psychology longer than I've been doing mediation, but I've been doing mediation for about 20 years. And so I'm going to bring some of that background to this presentation. So once my slides get up there. All right. So I'm going to talk about where it came from in the United States, and I'm going to give an overview, then talk a little bit about screening, go into the hallmarks of mediation as we see it, but I realize this is an international group and all of us need to share what's going on because I think we need to learn from each other. This is a critical area for all of us, and we need to be talking about it. I'll talk some about abuse and conflict and how we need to start looking at ourselves, because I think sometimes we forget who we are and how important that is in the process. I'm pulling everything around the screen so I can watch all of you while I'm doing this. And talking about intimate partner violence and how violence toward children, how it's dealt with in mediation in the United States. My initial training was in family therapy, so I had a lot of opportunities to deal with violence and in families. Before I realized the mediation part of it, I was dealing at it from a therapeutic viewpoint. And even though I've practiced mediation for about 20 years, most of my time now is in training. So I'll be drawing from some things that I have done, but unlike Carly, I'm not doing it next week. So I'm really glad you had that perspective. If you look at the statistics just in the United States, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men have some kind of sexual, physical violence, stalking from an intimate partner. And that means, you know, it's reported in over half of the divorce cases. That means as mediators, half the people you see are going to have had violence in their background if you're practicing in the United States. And I think that's a very significant number for all of us, and we need to pay attention to that. In 1981, most of the states implemented mediation for domestic disputes, and a small number of states mandate mediation in all cases. One state doesn't exempt victims from domestic violence from requirements to mediate. And I think, you know, there's been a lot of research, even in the last year, and a number of articles calling for that state to stop that practice because it disempowers and jeopardizes the victims, the women, the children, sometimes the men that have been being abused, to force them into a situation where they have to be in a mediation where their safety is compromised. And that kind of process is structured to favor the batterer. And I would have to say all but one of the states really does an excellent job of protecting that. Let's talk about screening. And I hope that there have been screening, different ways people are screened for violence in mediation to make sure that we know that if it's a history there. And I know that varies in every part of the world. So I hope that we're sharing those resources. I will share some of those here that are online and that you may be able to find some use in. And you know, some cases that have a history of violence just shouldn't be mediated. Early on in my career, and I will share this, I was very fortunate that violence didn't get out of hand, but I did not know all of the safeguards I needed to take. And I think that's true for many people when they're starting in the process. They don't realize the complexity and everything that needs to be done to ensure the safety of everyone there. And so screening becomes a very important issue. Family mediators should definitely be trained. And I was glad to hear that that's something that other people are practicing. because it's important to know what to look for. And I'll talk about some of the characteristics we look for in this country. And then please, those are just one perspective. We by no means have the answer to this. I think the best we can have is if we all work together and learn from each other. But any mediation must be safe. And so we've got to always think about protecting the victims. So if the abuse is at a level where there is continuing abuse, requiring them to mediate is not advisable. The mediation assessment of safety issues and concerns is an online instrument, and I did put the URL up there for anybody who wants to look at it. It's available to anyone, and I realize I apologize it's in English, and that's all I have the ability to share, so please understand. But it's something that can be used, that is helpful, and I think the more tools we have, the better off we're going to be in terms of dealing with these situations. Carly talked a minute about training, and I'm going to add to that. Knowing how to screen, and I'll give you some questions in a few minutes. Certainly knowing, have you ever been hurt? And sometimes they will answer that and sometimes you won't. I liked the comment that came in the chat a little while ago that talked about, well, are you going to know in an online mediation if an individual is, you can't read all their nonverbals? It's very difficult. Even when you're with them, it takes some time to be able to look and understand all the complex nonverbals that can go on in a situation. But we all do the very best we can. Certainly looking for evidence of abuse in court records. And sometimes that's an important thing to do and check, because they will tell you, no, everything's fine, there hasn't been any abuse. And yet when you dig a little bit deeper and your intuition starts saying there's something else going on here, and that needs to continue to be screened throughout the mediation process so that you know when to refer and when you need to terminate. I'm going to give you 5 general areas of screening that are used in the states. And the first one is, can they say what they think? Can they raise difficult topics? Can they stand up for themselves and what matters in this? Can they even disagree? Some of the people I've worked with in the past, it's really hard. They've been abused for so long or in different ways. I always screen for, are they going to be able to speak up for themselves? Will they be able to use their voice in that situation? Can everyone there follow the ground rules, respecting each other, be open and honest? And in all mediations, this is certainly important, isn't it? We want to make certain everybody can feel heard and that they have a chance to. But in these situations, it's even more important because you have to make sure that they're able to share in decision-making and that they honor whatever agreements that have been made. That isn't, that's more complex when there's been any kind of intimate partner violence or any kind of violence toward children. Are the parents able to make good decisions for the children? Are both of them able to do that? And think not of themselves, but about the children's needs and their own responsibility to make certain that we take care of the children first. And specifically for partner violence, we need to look at all those levels of safety, everything from stalking to controlling to any kind of threats or innuendos that you pick up, financial abuse. Do they have weapons available? Has there been any other kind of abuse in the home? Is there any jealousy, any denial, any emotional abuse? All of those are areas of safety that we need to be concerned with. And in the States, those are areas that are a part of many of the assessments that people use. We want to make certain everybody's safe, because if without safety, there's not going to be any real any mediation that goes on. And the last one I'm going to mention is that everybody always understands the process. what their rights are, that they can stop this at any time, what their options are, what else is needed to participate, that they've got to be able to be ready and fully present at that, at the mediation. And those are just 5 areas that I know I've always ticked off and that are important in the literature that's coming out for everyone dealing with this in the United States. So let's talk a little bit about the hallmarks of mediation. Of course, it has to be voluntary. Nobody feels like they need to be coerced. That there's self-determination, that people behave in good faith. I'll go into some of these a little bit more. That they have the ability to make decisions, and that they know the decisions they're making and the implications it has. For the mediator, it's so important that that person be neutral. And it's an interesting balance, isn't it? Because we have to be able to sit back and say, you know, we're going to treat everybody the same, but there's always, when we know one partner has been abused, that we've got to make certain that their rights are always being taken care of. In my work as a psychologist, as well as a mediator, I've also dealt with people who were the abusers at different times. And so that's helped me to understand what kind of background brings them to a situation where they would do abuse. But when you're in mediation, certainly you want to make certain that they're going to be all right. But you always are having to balance that with the fact that this is a person who's been injured, or the children have been injured, and safety's got to be your number one concern. So we say neutrality, but in reality, we have to be very careful and aware that someone has been hurt, and we've got to make certain that that person is always safe. Everybody has to be, it has to be voluntary. They can't feel they're being coerced by the courts. They can't feel, well, I need to be there to show that maybe I can get back together with this person. If I do this, maybe I can make everything all right. They've got to be going in there to just say, I'm here because we've got an issue to deal with, and there's no other issues that are really pushing me to do that. Knowing what protections mediation gives, and aware for the victim that, yes, this is a risk. There's always a risk when you're sitting down either in the same room or online with somebody who's been abusive. It takes a lot of courage, doesn't it? It takes courage for all of us to do that. They have to be able to make decisions for themselves and their children. Self-determination is just really, really critical. And it has to happen without coercion. There's been a number of research studies, and I'm not going to bore you with lots of research studies, even though psychologists love to do that sort of thing, that talk about how important it is that mediators not give recommendations when they are doing mediation. And I think that's true always, but it's especially true now. It's not our job to fix things. It's our job to help these people work through the issues and provide a safe environment and facilitate that dialogue. It's not our decision to say, oh, I think I know what you need to do, because I bet anything they've already thought of that. We need to stay out of it. That's not our role. As much as possible, people need to be able to be honest and open and talk about what's happened to them, talk about what kind of abuse that they might have had, what kind of threats are going on. And if they have to do that on a sidebar, in a caucus, or need to talk with you personally about that, you need to leave that door open so that because that impacts any kind of mediation you would have going forward. As much as possible, you need to deal with any kind of hidden agendas. Many times, and there have been times I've had to terminate mediations. And we have to be so careful in these cases because we don't want, at least in the States, and please know that everything I'm saying is from here. I do a great deal of international work in terms of training mediators, but But what I'm speaking about now is dealing with these issues and experiences I've had and experiences of the research that's gone on in the States. We need to make certain that us terminating it doesn't end up causing more harm to the victim or even to the abuser. We need to be able to say, as I look at things in this mediation and after I've thought about it, I don't think this is the best vehicle going forward. And I want you to blame me for that. Don't blame each other. Don't blame the process. I've always taken it on me because I didn't want, when the mediation was terminated, for the abuser then to go, it's your fault this didn't work. You don't ever want to become, you don't ever want protecting people, which is what terminating usually is about. You don't want protecting people to come in the way of now facilitating more abuse. And so that's really important. For me, I just take it on myself. I said, just blame me. I've done lots of these over 20 years, and I want you to know I have a feeling when things aren't going to work out the best for both parties. And so I'm doing this for both of you, not for me, but for both of you, to make certain that you deserve the very best process possible. And that the agreement always has to ensure safety, and that is fair, and that both sides always feel good about it when they have their own counsel or their own advocates, or their own attorneys, whoever is in there with them, that they also independently feel that this is something fair for both sides. And Carly alluded to this also. I think it's important we always realize that we can bring in extra support. I don't know how many of you have used co-mediators. I've used a lot of co-mediators. I was working with a lot of mediators, and I had one person raise his hand and say, I've never used a co-mediator. And I said, really? He said, no. I said, even when you've got women whose voices are hard, he said, if women won't work with me, they're not good. And I thought, well, I'll never go to you as a mediator because I don't think I could trust you to listen to me. So a lot of times I will bring in a male mediator if I am dealing with people from different ethnic backgrounds than what I represent. I'm just this naive white woman from the United States. I bring in someone who represents them so they feel their voice is represented and heard. I know that that's financially not always available, but I will bend over to make certain that that creates a good environment for them. We can get support for advocates so that they know they can get some education or support. We can make sure that there's legal support for people who don't have any. We can make certain we help people understand the rules and procedures and set those up ahead of time. And if we don't know what they are, we can go to other people and get those. We get support for individuals who might be a part of the mediation, whether that's children, whether that's partners. We make sure there's a safe termination protocol. And I mentioned a little bit of what I do. I think when I read some of the things that happen that are difficult about terminations, sometimes they get terminated and then things get a lot worse. And I think that there are some ways we can create a safety net so that that doesn't happen, and that there's a quick transition to another intervention for these individuals. Sometimes we have to suspend or delay mediation because of other court proceedings or other issues, and that's fine. You want mediation to be the safe space that allows them to be able to really work through these issues, and so that both parties can move on with their lives. These are some online resources, and if you're interested, you can certainly email me or email some of the organizers, and I'll get those to you. These are online. There are a number of different handbooks and things that are available. Many of the states have put out their own, but I'd be glad to share whatever resources you need, because we all need, the more, and in getting ready for this presentation, I reviewed all the current research that's come out in the last 5 years, and have looked at what the best practices are across all the states, as well as looking at the work that I've done. And there are a lot of resources for all of us, in addition to wonderful programs like this. And I'm so impressed with the organizers for putting something of this depth and breadth together, and with the number of individuals who have logged on to learn more. Because if you're like me, I'm always learning. Let's talk a little bit about conflict and abuse. And I want to talk about us for a minute, and we'll probably do that for the rest of this presentation. We all have biases, and we don't talk about that a lot. I'm going to be speaking later today with all the judges in Ukraine who want to look at themselves and want to look at who they are and how they can be better in their role as judges. We all come at this with biases. We can't help it. We can sit back and say, well, I know that the right thing to do, but we still have biases. And I've seen women who tout themselves as feminists always seem to take the side of the abuser, not the victim. And I'm thinking, see, we all have something to learn. Sometimes I've even known mediators who've asked questions when we've sat back and processed things. So what did you learn from your mediation that didn't go well? Well, I don't know. I couldn't ever understand why she didn't leave. If we believe things like that, what we're doing, or why he didn't leave, we end up blaming the victim. And we need to be so careful that we realize that what happened, that there are so many reasons why people stay in relationships. They don't have other choices. They don't have other places to go. They're financially dependent. The way they were raised, they were taught their religious beliefs. They're taught they need to stay in a relationship that is difficult, even if it is abusive. They have children. They think that the children need to have protection. All of those things keep people in relationships that can be difficult. And we need not to blame them for that. Sometimes we even have the thing, well, it's there, why didn't they stop the abuse? They could have stopped it. Well, if any of us have ever been in a relationship, be it a work relationship with a boss, or maybe with a parent, or we were on the playground as a child, or if we were ever in any relationship where we felt attacked, we realize that when you're in the middle of that, we don't have the ability to do that. I also teach neuroscience because I'm a boring person. and neurologically, sometimes it takes our brains a while, once we're in an abusive situation, to even say, how can I have a rational response? So it's important we realize we need to look at any false assumptions we have that might affect the mediation. And I know some mediators that also think that mediation is counseling. And we've got our hands full just being mediators. We can't be counselors too. It's too much to ask us to take on that role. And that's something I always have to watch, because being a psychologist and a licensed psychologist, so I've done a lot of therapy in my life. That's not the role in mediation. We need to stay out of that role so we can use the role we have to maximum effectiveness. We start doing counseling and we no longer can have that very special, unique, and important role of being a mediator. So I'm sure all of us know what that cycle of abuse looks like. How tensions build, and then we have the incident of abuse, and then reconciliation, and then they're calm, and then it leads to another situation. And this happens over and over and over and over again. And what I want to talk with you about is how this can be seen in mediation. Because you're going to see So here you have the violent act. And it's during that honeymoon, it's during that reconciliation, it's during that calm period that people come in to mediation. That's when you see them. You don't see them necessarily when abuse is happening. You see them in that honeymoon period, in that calm reconciliation period we just saw on the last slide. That's when they come in to see you. And so you've got to always be aware anything could happen. They are there, the bettor wants to never do it again. They've acquiesced to mediation. They say they want to work together. They show remorse. They do all the right things. And when you listen to them, if you have a pre-mediation conference or you talk to them ahead of time, they are going to say everything right. And the victim, when you talk with them, they're going to say, oh, I want to help. They're going to be very forgiving. They want to come out to a settlement. They're going to try to appease. You're going to probably find them being pretty silent. And that's when you've got to be careful. As mediators, then we need to start discussing the issues that bring about tension and escalation, because that could happen. That's when the violence could get started again. That's when that whole system could get kicked back in again. They're not going to come in the violent phase. They're not even going to come in during the tension phase. They're going to come in when things are calm and when they have reconciled. And so we need to realize they're always at risk of that happening again. The victim is going to try to calm the batterer and withdraw, and then violence can happen again. You're going to start seeing the batterer, the person who's been abused, being moody. Maybe I shouldn't have come to mediation. Start blaming the victim. You're going to see them being angry and critical. You're going to see all these, those are going to be clues to us as mediators that we need to be careful, because those are red flags that violence could happen again. Just always remember, they don't come to mediation when the tension's building or when there's violence. They come when things are calm and they reconcile. But the cycle hasn't necessarily stopped. And remember the whole thing about this being about power and control, and all the different ways that it gets played out in this violence. And I'm going to say something about the person who is the batterer, the person who's the abuser. They've been through this. They have very likely, if they felt good about themselves, they would never hurt another person. If they had a good life, that they were treated kindly in all their relationships, they would have never gotten involved in this. These people come at this and have this experience of have become in this cycle of violence because of all the brokenness they bring with them. So it's not that they are without, that you couldn't feel for them or understand their pain. But for us as mediators, we've got to be very careful that we always make sure that the person that's being victimized gets help, and that the person who's the abuser needs help too. If they're not actively, if you sense that there's anything going to happen again, talking with their advocate, finding ways to make sure that they get some counseling and support is going to be critical, because they're hurting too. The problem is they're hurting someone else also. And again, all of those things, our needs are complex. And Bernie Mayer years ago put together this wheel of conflict. And I think that there's some wisdom in it. There's so much about who we are and what our culture is, and our values, emotions, and all of that become a part of the conflict process. And that's true for all the parties in mediation. We just need to be aware that it's always complex. And so for me, I put that up there and I look at it so that I'm reminded, so that I don't forget all the different pieces that might have led to this situation. It lets me honor their pain. So to ensure safety, and I'm going to talk about this for a couple slides, always screening, keeping, doing shuttle mediation, using caucuses, whatever to keep them apart if you think there's any kind of coercion going on. Even if things are safe, I've always used a large room that people could leave, make sure that people aren't sitting right next to each other, have separate. And I was glad to hear Carly said this right before me, separate safe waiting areas, making sure that they don't have to see each other when they come in. Make sure that there's a safety plan with the victim before mediation even starts. So what can we do if violence starts again? What happens if you start getting hurt or the children gets hurt? What can be our game plan? Let's have one. And I have done that with the abuser too. So let's say you're starting to think you feel out of control. The healthiest thing you could do would be to let me and other people know so you can get help and so that you don't put yourself in this situation or put other people in it. You can talk ahead of time and anticipate it, and it gives people tools. Again, and if you think that people have anything that they could hurt someone else with, you want to make certain that that is not the case. In our country, guns are an issue, and I'm embarrassed by that. I'm always aware when I say I'm from the United States, that has such baggage with it. And thank you for understanding me and the fact that I remember once I was in the UK after one of our presidents said something that wasn't very smart and that was very insensitive. And I got in a car with a cabbie who said, "Oh, you're from the States." I said, "Yes." And I said, "I'll say I'm sorry before it even starts." And the cabbie said, "No, you're not your president." Because we've had crazy presidents too. And that's not me either. So I always remember that because we can't be responsible for all the people in our countries. But we just have to be aware. And avoid any kind of thing that's going to legitimize or minimize what violence has been happened. You acknowledge that it was painful and it was wrong, and that's why we're here, to make certain that that doesn't happen again, and that we take care of all the parties so that this is not that this does not happen in this relationship, and that we let everybody move on and have a safe life. And again, the office setting, I always gave people a lot of room and ways that made them feel safe, things that I thought would make me feel safe, so that I know that they would also, that they knew what they could do if they started feeling uncomfortable, that they had a right to express that. But more than that, that I created a safe space for them. And these are just some things I put up there that when we feel, when you might be concerned, just some other red flags when you start noticing issues of control, when people are easily frustrated in the mediation, when they start taking no responsibility for the abuse, when the person you're talking with says that abuse is going on and they don't want to tell anybody about it. Even if you notice some psychological abuse that's going on, anything that you think that there's a risk of more violence. Those are things in the states that we've talked about and that mediators are taught and trained in. And I'm not going to go over the wonderful work that Carly did and that you all have heard from other speakers, but everything that was said up before me is that there's a lot of risk when you do online mediation because you don't know what's going on in the room. and that you have to be very careful. And so breakout rooms, waiting areas, you can't control texting. You have to be very skilled at reading all the nonverbal cues. You have a hard time, enforcing any rules you have about communication. So you have to be a real skilled person to do it online. And thank goodness we have a lot of people who do that. But just know, if you're just entering into this sphere, you need to be very aware that there are lots of things that you have to watch out for, and that you have to realize the limitations of this medium. And it allows us to offer mediation to more people than we would have ever been able to offer it to before. But with that, we have to have some additional safeguards, and make sure that people are safe and no one's abusing this wonderful medium that we've given them to be able to bring more of the parties together. So knowing about it, be good at power balancing, about everything we can about violence, its impact, knowing community resources so that you can help with referrals is important. So let's continue on that journey of looking at ourselves. And if we had a small group, we'd talk right now. But I've got this wonderful group that is not a small group, but something I would ask each of us to do. And I look at this in myself also. So I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to all of us. What is our history with conflict? How do we deal with conflict with other people? Think back on your life. When was the first time you remember a major conflict in your life, and how did you handle it? Did you leave? Were you quiet? How did you deal with that? Because even though now you're this wise, trained mediator that's doing all this wonderful work, you still hold some of those early issues that may still go on in your relationships. When you get angry with somebody, do you just leave, or do you talk with them? I have 2 daughters. We raised them the same way. One daughter, when she was getting married, she invited all of her past boyfriends to the wedding. All of them. Because she's still friends with all of them. She worked out all of her issues with all of them. I thought it was odd that they all came to the wedding, but I liked all of them. So that was fine. Our other daughter, when her relationship is over, she says they are dead to me. And some of her old boyfriends wanted to call her. One of them even wanted to get together with her before he got married. He said, listen, I'll break up. Do you think there's ever a chance I could be back together with you? And she said, we are done. Don't call me again. So we all have ways we deal with conflict. Look at your history. Look at how you deal with conflict. And I want you to know, look at how that might enter the way you deal with mediation. And I don't know, I looked at all the people that are on here. I work with lots of attorneys in my work in training mediators, and most attorneys I know don't like conflict. I think that's interesting, but that's a whole different area, a different presentation. But I think most attorneys say, I'd really not rather have people in conflict. And if I have any attorneys here, make sure you know what those issues are so that you can help people who are going to be angry with each other. Learn to get comfortable with it. And first, we have to learn in our own lives. Learn how to deal with emotions. And how most of us have a complex history with them. Most of us have emotions we like and emotions we don't like at all. We need to be peaceful with all of them. And maybe we need to do a little work on ourselves. I have done that. So I make sure I bring my best self to any mediation that I'm a part of. Remember, underneath the anger is always pain, always nervousness, embarrassment, sadness, insecurity, always. So when I see anger, that doesn't worry me. When I see violence, that does. But anger is something most of us experience. And we need to realize that that comes from very, very vulnerable places. So we just need to be aware of how we're going to deal with that and not just shut it down, but learn how to facilitate it in a way so that you get at what's under the anger, not just deal with what's on top. And that we're always going to tell. That's the thing. And I do lots of work online now. And sometimes I can tell what's going on, sometimes I can't. But when I'm in a room with somebody, I can always feel when the anger starts. And these are some body scans, heat scans. When someone's angry, you know how we say they're hot or they're blowing off steam. Physically, their temperature rises. It is a physiological response that's going on. And it's going on neurologically too. When our emotions get really triggered, it shuts down the whole prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is our higher decision making. Our ability to be rational is shut off when we get really angry. That's why it's so important to learn to deal with anger, to learn how to re-engage that. But most people haven't been taught that. And people who are violent, this is the work of a counselor and a therapist, is to help them to learn to re-engage that. But just know that it's an out of control process. That when they say they can't control it, neurologically, they probably can't. And that just amplifies it. It's the fight, flight, freeze. And this is what happens with people who are victims. Do I stand in and fight with them? Do I leave, or do I just freeze? And that's what they do when they encounter that. And now they're afraid. And just know that once the amygdala gets triggered, all the bells go off in our brains. Think about it in our own lives. Don't we get angry? And when we get angry, do we always sit back and say, let me take a deep breath? Or do we go off and we think about it? Let me tell you when it's happened for me. During the day, I'm really good at that. But when I'm asleep at night and I have a dream that triggers something that I'm still angry or upset about and that is not resolved, then I wake up and I think about it. I bet some of you do too. And so then you start thinking about it, and then you can't go back to sleep again. So think about how that process is for people who don't have any way to slow that down. And for me, I've learned, okay, that's just a little piece and I'll deal with that tomorrow, but I need to sleep too. But it's a process, and it's a neurological process, and we have to learn to deal with it. And it can happen at any different point in the process. Just remember that emotions fuel conflict, and they also are going to be what helps us get through it. And mediators are key to that. And that if we don't deal with them, it's only going to get worse. So what's important is that we learn how to listen, not just active listening, but deep listening. And listen to connect, to empathize, and not trying to just speak or to evaluate them, but to really make sure we hear what's being said. And that's going to help them to learn to listen to each other and to themselves. What's important, you as the mediator are the most important part of this. You're the key. And you can't lead anyone further than you've gone yourself. So if you haven't done this work, if you aren't sure where you are in that, then you're going to get stuck every time you get in one of these mediations where there's been violence. And I'm back with everybody again. Oh, it's so good. Even though I only see a few faces, it's good to see all of you again.
Mary, mums ir viens jautājums, ko uzdod mediātors. Kas ir tie brīži, tie sarkanie karodziņi, kur mediātoram vajadzētu apsvērt mediāciju pārtraukt? Un kā tas izskatītos praktiski, kā mediātors to vienmēr var vērst no savas puses, pat ja kāda puse izteikti neveicina progresu mediācijā?
That's a good question. Let me see if I can help you with that answer. I hope I can. And if I don't, please tell me. All the things I'm talking about are you're in the middle of a mediation and all of a sudden the victim quits talking. Then you break up, you go into separate rooms and say, help me understand what's going on. All of a sudden, I'm not hearing your voice. What's happening? I might even, but that would be a red flag. I'd also pull the person who's been the abuser aside and say, did you notice they quit talking? I wonder what that's like for you. What do you think is happening? What have you been talking about that might have caused that? Or do you have any idea why all of a sudden they got quiet? If I start seeing anything that shows to me that there is an escalation and that they're beginning, I'm seeing any of those signs, those red flags, there's quietness, there's tension in the room, there's the abuser's getting frustrated, the abuser's not admitting to anything anymore, the victim is apologizing for everything, I see any of those things happening, then I sit back and say, what's going on? I will talk with them. I'll bring them back together, see if it continues, try to facilitate the discussion. But if it looks to me like we're moving to an area, it's getting out of control, and certainly I'll have talked to the advocates and say, I'm worried. I'm just worried something's going on. What do you all think? And usually they will validate that. Every time I've said that, they've said, something's happening here. I don't know what's going on, but this one's withdrawing and this one's getting angry. And that to me is a clue that we either need, we need to do something, that the mediation isn't as effective when we don't have two parties who have all of those qualities I talked about early in the mediation of a chance to speak for themselves, to self-determine, to be able to make sure that you're listening to the other party, you're willing to work together. When all of those basic tenets of what we need in mediation, when those aren't there, then I need to say, what else is missing? And I'll check out all the possibilities before I terminate. But then I will say, it just seems like this process isn't helping as much as it could. What do you both think? And usually one of them will say, no, I don't think this is working. I'm not at fault. This is what's going on. And I say, well, good. I'm glad you told me that. So, and put that on me. Let's see what we can do to help you find something else. I check out everything before I terminate, but I look for all of those things that show me that people are not able to be fully engaged in the mediation, and that with all my help, they're still not able to get engaged. I hope that was helpful. Did that help answer your question?
Ļoti.
Okay.
Vēl viens jautājums, Mary, lūdzu, tāds īss, bet iespējams arī sarežģīts. Sakiet, lūdzu, mums te bija tāds jautājums, kā var saprast, kā no vardarbības cietusī persona izsaka savu gribu piedalīties mediācijā brīvprātīgi?
Oh, that's such a good question. And you're right, that is a complex question. Let me see how I can best answer that. That's very, very difficult. It's really difficult to get somebody to know if they fully are willing and able to do that. All we can do is we enter into the area of trust. I would talk with them individually. I'd say, you've been through a lot. Is this something you feel you can do? But the reason I put together that cycle of violence with mediation being a part of that, and I pulled on a lot of research and put that together because I thought we need to realize we can be part of that cycle. Sometimes we think, oh, we are the heroes, we're going to fix this. But sometimes, when they come in that calm reconciliation period, we just are a new player in the cycle. We have to trust and listen to them and see if they can speak up to us. I will ask them, you've been in this violent relationship. How are you going to be able to speak up for yourself? How are you doing that now? I'll ask them specifics about what they're doing in their life to now speak up for themselves and or their children. How are you taking care of them? How are you making sure that you are safe? What are you doing when maybe you're, if they've got a history of being abused by their parents or being controlled by their parents, I'll say, well, how are you speaking up to them? What have you done to make sure you can have a voice when people might attack you again? I just want to make sure I can provide you the support. But the first thing that's important is that you speak up, that you are at a place where you've got that ability. And if you're not, then let's get you some counseling so that you can. There's no blame if you can't do that right now. But I will, if they give me every indication that they are ready and they can speak up to me. Don't we look at that in mediation? We look at how they talk to us. If they are appropriately assertive to us, if they speak up for themselves to us, then that shows me that there's a behavioral component to that I can start trusting that more. But it is complex. I hope that was helpful.